talking under the tree. We talking under the tree. Let's talk under the tree. Let's talk under the tree. We talking under the tree. We talking under the tree. Let's talk under the tree. Let's talk under the tree. Welcome to the show. Appreciate that you came. Mr. Palmer T. Smalls ain't a damn thing changed. We talking under the tree. Yeah, we got them hot topics from Carolina to Duval. That's how we rock it on prime time. Check out the podcast. It's online. Hit us up. We got a platform. You gon' shine. It was all a dream. We here now. Let me hear you say it loud. We talking under the tree. We talking under the tree. We talking under the tree. Let's talk. Let's talk.
What up, T. Smalls? What it do? What it do?
What's going on, Mr. Palmer? How you doing, sir?
It's a lovely day in Jacksonville, Florida. We have Mr. Jerry Urso, Miss Long, the granddaughter of Mr. Thomas Long, from slave descendant. We're gonna chop it up a little bit and get down to the nitty gritty. See what's going on with his life. And you're his great granddaughter, great granddaughter.
Correct.
Right.
Great granddaughter.
Yeah, I make sure I put the the G in there.
Please do. Don't say granddaughter.
Yeah. If I don't say it right, it might tell your age a little bit, right? Because he was born in the 1830s.
Yeah, he'd be 190.
Right.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
But I get it, right? T. Smalls, how you doing today, my brother?
Man, I'm doing fine, man. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
It's a beautiful day. Show them some love.
Yo, we talking under the tree.
Show them some double love. Do what you do.
Look, man, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Since we together, we might as well stay. Could you be mine? Would you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? We talking under the tree, man.
I think you got getting better than Mr. Rogers with that thing.
Hey, man, Mr. Rogers gonna have to give me a check.
Well, if we can work on you, not praying so long, kind of long-winded, we'll be kind of even. What you think?
I think we'll be all right, brother.
Right. I might have to take over and help you out a little bit on that right there. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We'll be back in 20 seconds and we'll get things cracking. One time for your mind. T. Smalls, what else they say?
Man, 2 times for your soul.
We'll be back in 20 seconds.
Kingpin Music.
Okay, we back. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. I'm honored actually to do this interview, me and T. Smalls with Jerry and Miss Long, because a lot of African American heritage, our history is lost. And Jerry, I really appreciate you, doing what you do for the research, brother. Hey, at first I thought it was a little flim-flam, but I have to give you a pat on the back. You got it.
Look, man. Hey, that's the ultimate historian right there. He gonna get down to the nitty gritty, the deep. I mean, you be like, what he find us at?
Right.
I said that too. I seen some of the tombstones. I said, man, you can barely read it.
If you only knew how many cemeteries I've been to with my peroxide and sponges and so forth, trying to find people where they're buried. It's two of the things, like as a historian, there's nothing that warms my heart more than when I can either go to the grave of one of the people I write about or form a relationship with one of the descendants.
Right.
Over the course of the last few years, I've been able to get a relationship with Daniel Webster Perkins' daughter, Camilla Perkins, Blanche Armwood's niece, George P. Norton, and Carl Norton's grandson, Carl Norton, and, with Patricia, and also with the bunch of other people, like just when you get to meet the family and share and give them things that they never had before, with like pictures of their family members or documents or, you know, anything of that nature, you know, it really makes me feel good, because I'm not the matter of fact historian. For me, you know, I was having a conversation with a fellow historian today, and I said, you know, my niche has always been, I always wanted to tell the human interest side of these people. I want to bring them back. You know, names and dates, and being a matter of fact about history, is one thing, but like sometimes you got to bring the person's essence back to life. You got to bring a piece of their soul, because like with the person that we're going to speak about today, this guy's John Wayne.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? I can't think of too many, other than maybe Josiah T. Walls, of another man who had did so much for so long in his life that changed lives that we're still benefiting from today, like we are with T.W. Long. It's just no other way to put it. I mean, the guy just lived the extraordinary life. And I think I don't know if I ever mentioned this. I know usually when I do these podcasts, the story always has a sad ending or a tragic ending. Like today, it starts out with tragedy and ends happy. Okay, so I want to, you know, I'm going to get the smile and not, you know,
right.
Smile as I talk about T.W. Long, but you know, his legacy just endures. And when I see these kids running around with these T-shirts that say, "I am not we are not our ancestors," I just like want to like, are you crazy?
Yeah, that bothers me too.
That's man.
They live under the protection that they could wear that T-shirt.
Right.
These people were living at a time where at any point they could be killed and left on the side of the road for the struggles that they were fighting for, and yet they continued on. They didn't have no police. There was no CNN crew covering it back then. So, you know, from that standpoint, these people were just fearless. And I can't think of anybody more fearless than Thomas Warren Long.
Right. Me and T. Smalls have a question for Miss Long, great-great-granddaughter. I trace my history on my mama's side back to about 1850. I'm not sure about T. Smalls, but anyways, did you always know about, you know, the history of your great-great-grandfather from slave to senator, you know, growing up?
No, actually, not as far back as him. My grandfather, yes, because I grew up with a family of pastors. So, you know, as a child, they always talked about, you know, things going on in the church. But as far as our history goes, what happened is my niece she was living in Amsterdam, and she started a business called Ancestors Unknown. And basically what that was connecting the youth or generations of that part of the diaspora, you know, with their ancestors and letting them know. And so with the pandemic coming, it gave me a little more time. I've always been interested in doing it, so I would do it here and there. But after partnering with Jerry, it is time consuming. I mean, you really have to put in the work to kind of cross these T's and dot these I's. And so when the pandemic hit, it really opened up an opportunity for me to really, really, you know, dive deep into what she had done most of the work. So we were able to go back 5 generations because we were able to trace TW's father back to where he was captured in Africa.
Wow.
Taken to Cuba.
Nice.
So we've been extremely blessed to be able to have a paper trail. You know, a lot of times you don't have the opportunity to go back that far, but then in addition to have photographs and documents made it just, you know, even better.
Right. Hey, Jerry, before you get into it, I know you track a lot of history down, you know, African Americans, that's a blessing, but have you ever had any player haters to actually give you this look and ask you this question because of jealousy, because you're doing something that they don't do? Have anybody asked you this right here?
Who is you?
Time. You know what I find interesting? When I was in college, so I studied European history, and my European history teacher at Holy Cross was an African American woman. Okay, so like she could tell you all the Caesars, the entire history of the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Persian Empire. She really, she studied a lot of the, ancient antiquity, especially in Southern Europe. So I never looked at her cross-eyed, but for some reason there is a taboo of African American history.
Right.
And especially because it's been whitewashed for so long, so that when someone starts putting in the work, people are skeptical or what have you. But my thing is, my mentors is, Dr. Larry Eugene Rivers and Dr. Cantor Brown. Now, Cantor Brown is a white man who was a history professor at FAMU, and Larry Rivers is the dean, and them two have written 18 books together. So they're kind of like my Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. I mean, this is how I joke with them. But that's how I always look at it. And like, Cantor Brown is on his 18th book. So he's probably the foremost historian of African American history in the state of Florida. Him and Dr. Rivers, and he just told me, if this is what this is the place to be, because he said there's so much there's so many books written about Andrew Jackson and Thomas Jefferson, and he said African American history has been forgotten, and it's a fertile ground if you're willing to put in the work, because these are the stories that haven't been told yet. So I found my niche. I mean, because I always liked history. I studied American history. My first love was Revolutionary War history, and then I became a Civil War buff. And then when I came down here to Florida, I'm like, how come nobody heard of Thomas Warren Long? And how come there's not like a statue to Josiah T. Walls somewhere? And I'm looking at like, I think I'm on my 125th article of, African American history. And I think other than James Weldon Johnson, A.L. Lewis, and a couple others, nobody ever heard of these people, and they were just as significant as they are.
Wow.
It kind of reminds me of Black History Month, right? Where Black History Month, you're going to roll out Harriet Tubman.
Yeah.
You're going to, I mean, it's just like the Frederick Douglass, Thurgood Marshall.
The common ones, the ones that everybody already know about.
Right.
Man.
And if you get real deep, you might find Benjamin Banneker in there.
Right.
And then the problem is Robert Smalls, but the problem is there's thousands.
Oh yeah. Robert
thousands
Smalls,
of people, especially in the state. I will say this. If you get a chance, this is one of my favorite books, because this was written by Cantor Brown and Larry Rivers, Florida's Black Public Officials, right? And it's not a whole, and even though it just lists names and so forth, it was such a starting point for me to find people that were worthy to research.
Wow.
And like Thomas Warren Long doesn't have a library dedicated to him like Ida B. Wells does, or the Schomburg in New York, or the Frederick Douglass in Maryland, or Fisk University with James Weldon Johnson. So a lot of these people get lost to history, but if you dig in enough spots, you start pulling together all this stuff, and all of a sudden I'm like, there's a picture of this guy.
Yeah.
And then not only did I find one picture, I think I'm up to 11 pictures of Thomas Warren Long. So, and then it just starts coming to life. And, when I went to the Library of Congress, I spent 3 days up there just looking for pictures, because I knew he was, being a senator, eventually you would find his picture, and then when you find that picture, or when I started digging in the archives of the state of Florida, I found the same document that they found, the inventory sheet of the Roberts plantation, because that's what it was. He was inventory before the emancipation of slavery, and then finding an actual picture of the Roberts plantation was horrific for me, even though you don't see anybody. You don't actually see the slaves, but just seeing that this is the plantation, that this is where the work took place. This is where the pain and suffering came from.
Yeah, what's happening?
So, you know, I actually, you know, I had called, you know, because I call her on a regular now anytime I find anything. And when I went to Upper Beaver Street to the location where the plantation was, I was like almost in tears because I could feel this spirit. But I was relieved that it's an industrial complex, that like the entire, any evidence of that plantation is gone. Because, you know, it's an industrial complex. It's a, you know, it's where the, you know, all those trucking industry places are and so forth. So, you know, in some ways that's a good thing, you know, that there's no evidence like this place can't be memorialized because it shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. It's another plantation somewhere on Hector Drive. I forgot the name of it. It's
the Kingsley?
Oh, yeah, Kingsley Plantation. That's
what, yeah.
You been there small? You ever been there small?
No, man. I ain't been there, but I heard about it, man, because I used to work down History Drive, man, over there off the river and stuff like that.
What Jerry was saying about that feeling, I went down there, and I think the dirt road is about 2 miles long, something like that. It's long, and you get that feeling. You can feel it, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you go to places like that, even back home in Carolina, man, where I'm from. When you go to places like that, it's like the connection, man. You automatically feel a connection when you at these old plantation, man, where, you know, the slaves, man, did the pain and suffering. It's kind of like they attached to you, which they are attached to you, but you feel it in present day, man. And it's amazing because it's like the ancestors are talking to you present day, man. You know what I mean? I mean, even when you go to the museum, same thing. You feel the same feeling, like, oh man, it's like you going back in time, like you time traveling, man. You know what I'm saying? In present day.
Right.
And another
you go
thing,
to the Kingsley Plantation, when you go into the entryway driving in, it's a long road with nothing but trees.
Yeah.
It gives you like the most, it's a weird feeling.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
Even driving up to it, like you travel for a couple of minutes before you even get to anything. And you just think like, what happened here? Like you can feel it.
Yeah.
Do you know what feeling I got the first time I went up that bare road with all them trees? It reminded me of the Bible, where Golgotha or Calvary, where the cross was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you study Roman history, you know that there was a road that led there, and along the road they had these trees, and these trees are where they crucified these people. So when you got to Golgotha, you had traveled, and you weren't taken down from the cross. I mean, that, you know what I'm saying? So they were left. So that was the eerie feeling I got, where it was when I first went up to the plantation and they have that road leading up there. It just reminded me of Calvary for some reason.
Yeah. Miss Long, me and T. Smalls had a conversation about your last name, and it's amazing that you and your great-grandfather have the same last name. That's something that's unheard of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that right there is amazing, man, how the name still lives on all these years. Because usually, you know what I'm saying, as you grow older, man, and, you know, you get married and stuff like that, you know, the name kind of changes, but you kind of keep it as part of your name, you know, when you go on. But to see that you actually keeping the name alive, man, that's very, very amazing.
Yes. And another thing that I want to point out that, you know, when I heard that, I heard that he was a slave when Jerry was talking to me about doing the show. And, you know, he said he was a slave. And I said, yeah, maybe he may be caught the end of it. But now he was born in the 1830s. So,
like 1839. So he was in the midst of it, man. He was like in the heart of it. Like, just like how we had the heart of the pandemic, he was in the heart of slavery, man. And his story is like, man, for him to come out of slavery and be a senator, man, that's big time. That's really big time. And a lot of people need to know of that, man, as far as our history in school. You know what I'm saying? If they're not being taught that, man, they need to be taught that so they can know.
And there's so many aspects of his story that there's just all these breadcrumbs right from the beginning. He was aware who his father was.
Right.
And that was important to him. So when his son, Charles Sumner, wrote the history of the A&B Church, you know, he one of the first paragraphs when he writes about his father was his father longing for his father, and that his father was a member of the Zulu tribe. That he actually knew what tribe he came from the Middle Passage. and how like that actually plays into the history of Florida, because that means he had if Thomas Warren Long was born in Florida in 1839, his father most likely came through the Spanish rule. So when Spain ruled Florida, because Florida didn't become a part of the United States until 1840. So he most likely came through Cuba, because that's where a lot of the people from that portion, like if you have that map that I had given you, you can see like how people from that tribe of Africa actually came across the transatlantic slave trade, went from Brazil to Cuba, and then from Cuba they were illegally brought into Florida. Most likely St. Augustine. So if you ever go to the Bridge of Lions and you see that pavilion in the square, you know, the original pavilion is where they sold slaves in Florida.
Right.
Man, we have one comment. We have to read this one right here. T. Smalls, what they say.
I'm so honored and happy to see my beautiful dear friend Ms. Long on this podcast and learning about the history of her family. That feeling is how I felt of my first trip to Africa. I had a feeling like I've never had felt before in my whole entire life. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
This.
Yes. Hey, Jerry.
Okay.
When you found Mr. Long's records from his father, you traced it back to Cuba. What was the feeling, man? Did you like said wow or what?
I said wow because he took because when his son rewrote it, so you know that the son wrote it in pride, it was given to the son with pride. So for me, it was like Thomas Warren Long wore his African roots like a badge of courage.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, you hear so many people that the fact that he was able to connect to an actual place in Africa probably makes it even more special.
Right.
Most people, unfortunately, don't know where they came from, so they have to embrace a continent where he was able to not only embrace a country, but he was able to embrace a tribe.
Right.
So, you know, so for him, you know, I'm sure, you know, that was a source of pride that he wanted to make sure that his son recorded that. Because it's actually, I believe his son when his son actually published that book, I think it was on the 100th anniversary of his birth. So I think it was 1939 when when Reverend Charles Sumner Long actually wrote the history of the AME Church. So, and then his father being one of the pioneers of the AME Church, it was, you know, I think when I just can't imagine when he put pen to paper and was writing that story, the emotion that was going through his hand as he was writing that.
Right. Right.
And the fact and his very name is significant. You know, he was Thomas Warren Long probably had I know a lot of African Americans were named after famous people, but their name was actually picked for them. So when Thomas Warren gave his son the name, it was his choice because it was after emancipation. It was after the Civil War. So he must have had such an affinity for the abolitionist Charles Sumner to name his son, because I think his first son's named after his brother James, and then his next
father's
son,
name was James as well.
Right, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, his firstborn was James in honor of his dad, and then he instead of naming his next child after himself, he named it after Charles Sumner. And I'm positive that at some point, since he had the life of Forrest Gump in many aspects, right? And I'm not saying that in a negative way. Like I was joking with Patricia today before we go on the show. Like if you believe in 6 degrees of separation. And I know they had a TV show called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, right?
Right.
You could do the same thing with Thomas Warren Long. So
Right.
when we get into his story, when I start telling his story, you'll see how it's like Forrest Gump. It's like all along the way. It's fame. He's just encountered with every famous person in American history of that time period.
I'm gonna put a photo up before you get into that real quick. Here you go.
There's my guy.
Go ahead and explain that, Mr. Urso.
Okay, this picture was taken in 1875, and Thomas Warren Long is the gentleman in the front row with the hat.
Wow.
Nice.
Man.
And in the back row, you'll see Robert Meacham. Now, most people don't know Robert Meacham is African American. It was actually lieutenant governor, and he actually is the co-author of the Florida State Constitution.
Wow. Man. Here we go. What you got?
Those are his military records. So before we get there, let me start from the beginning.
Okay.
So from all accounts by Charles Sumner Long, he was already a minister while he was on the Roberts Plantation on Beaver Street.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a communication network between all the plantations throughout the whole country. There was, especially in Florida. So, neighboring plantations, any movements and things that were going on, word would get to these ministers. And, even while the white overseers were sitting in the churches, they were able to give people information. So sometimes it would be, by the book and chapter, might be a time or or they would use a scripture in the Bible to describe a location. So through that network, Thomas Warren Long found out that the first South Carolina volunteers were coming to Fernandina, Florida. Mm-hmm. So, on the cover of Darkness, he kisses his wife, and at that time it's just his son James. He kisses James goodbye, and he becomes a runaway slave. So on foot, he travels from. Now think about this: y'all drive up 95.
Right.
Could you imagine under the cover of darkness going from Beaver Street to Yulee, Florida, in one night on foot?
Wow, man.
Okay. And when he gets there, there's probably out of all the
but no interstate.
No, there was no 95.
Listen,
there was no rest stop along the way.
Right. That's a long way, man. That's why that was a long way.
So he makes it there, and I can't think of any group of runaway slaves or freeman former slaves could have walked into a better situation than when they joined the first South Carolina Volunteers because of their commanding officer. Thomas Wentworth Higginson is actually one of the John Brown Six. Mm-hmm. Okay. So he's not just an abolitionist. He is of the most extreme abolitionists in the country. The John Brown Six was so radical that Frederick Douglass was like, "Hey man, y'all got to slow down." I mean, that's the truth. Frederick Douglass was, if you know the whole story of, John Brown, these guys were as radical as they got. So when he forms the first, when the United States, when Abraham Lincoln authorizes the first use of an African-American troop for runaway slaves, the first South Carolina Volunteers is the first, because the Massachusetts 54th is made up of freemen. The 3rd Regiment, they were made up of freemen from Pennsylvania. So this is the first regiment entirely made up of former slaves and runaway slaves. So they have so Thomas Wentworth Higginson could have picked any duty station in the country he wanted, but he chose to serve with runaway slaves, right? Wow. So when he writes his book is probably some of the most preserved, as he called it in the book, Negro spirituals, stories, quotations, and the thoughts and prayers, the conversations around the campfire. He documented everything. So when you read this book, things that have been lost to history are actually found in this man's book, because he took such strides to record, all these songs and so forth. So, Thomas Wentworth Higginson was another version of, John Brown, right. What I'm saying? Right. Except he was more literate, and then secondly, the medical officer of the first South Carolina Volunteers is Seth Rogers, who is a Harvard graduate surgeon, who another man could have picked any duty station he wanted, could have picked any infantry unit or cavalry, or he could have maybe stayed at West Point. So you got a Harvard University surgeon volunteering to come to Morris Island to meet up with the 1st South Carolina Volunteers to be the medical officer. So this infantry unit had the best medical care. And then add on to that, guess who the nurse is?
Who?
Susie King Taylor.
Wow.
Oh yeah. I think I read something about her. Yep.
Now Susie King Taylor teaches all these former runaway slaves how to read. And guess who else was the scout for this unit?
Who?
Harriet Tubman.
Oh, you're not.
So one of the funny stories and anecdotes from the book is Harriet Tubman was quite the character, and she was leading a lot of the campfire stories. But Thomas Wentworth Higginson said, she was entertaining enough, but there was a old man. So like, so when some of these plantations were liberated, there was no place for the elderly. So there was a very old man, and they called him Uncle Cato. And they said that as much as he enjoyed the stories of Harriet Tubman, nothing compared to the anecdotes of Uncle Cato. Like, he just would love to listen to this man. He called them yarns and campfire yarns. So this regiment actually is one of the regiments that goes to Lake City, Florida, and participates in the Battle of Olustee. So during the battle, they had, Lake City at that time, a lot of swampland, right? Florida swampland. So there's a lot of wooden bridges and so forth. So the only way the Confederate, even though the Union Army lost that battle, the only way they could get the cannons over was these wooden bridges. So Thomas Warren Long volunteers to go on a suicide mission to burn the bridges down so the Confederates couldn't get the cannons over. So if he didn't do that, it would have been a complete loss. Secondly, he becomes the minister of the 1st South Carolina Volunteers. So when you had the Massachusetts 54th, the 3rd Regiment out of Jacksonville, the 2nd Regiment out of Tallahassee, and then you got the 1st South Carolina Volunteers, and I think it was the 4th Cavalry, which is a white unit. Guess who leads the cheerleading prayer the night before the battle? Ooh. Thomas Warren Long.
Wow.
So now he's Corporal Long, and he was their hype man. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Like, he was the Flavor Flav of the unit.
He was the
I tell this with a little bit of fun because you got to have some fun with this history.
Right. He
Thomas
was the pep
Warren
rally.
Long
The pep rally.
fired these guys up where they would go through hell. In one of his prayers, he was talking about that God had blessed him with bullets, but then he was asking God to bless him with valor. And he was talking about the mustard seed. And if ye have just as much faith in the mustard seed, how it would grow. And he was asking for God to give them courage and so forth. I mean, he had the white guys riled up. Like, wow. Let's go.
Back in the day, pep rally.
Yeah.
There you go. So after the battle, they got to march back through what city to get back to Fernandina?
Wow.
Jacksonville, right?
Wow.
So what does he do? Takes his military issue rifle, goes to the Roberts plantation, and has a visit with old man Roberts. And guess what he does?
What did he do?
Gets his wife.
Oh, he strong-armed him.
He liberated his wife and children from the Roberts plantation, and they ended up for the next 2 years, from 1864 to late 1865. He and his wife and his child are being reared with the unit. And one of the first, so his wife is already part. So all the women of the soldiers that were liberated, they were working with Susie King Taylor and Harriet Tubman, and they're getting experience. So, one of the things about Thomas Long and his wife is that this experience created them to be a power couple. They were a cohesive unit, and they were married for almost 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, as he is the probably the most known AME minister in Florida, his wife is one of the most famous first ladies. So, one of the things they don't talk about is the role of African American women back then. The most prominent African American women in the African American community are the first ladies and the choir directors. So she's a trendsetter. People gonna look at her on how she dressed, how she walked, how she talked, and it's evident by James and Charles Sumner Long how educated they were, and it was a testament to their upbringing by their mother and father, who were a cohesive unit. You don't see this male chauvinism, especially in the Black community, until the 1920s. And during Reconstruction, these are people that came out of slavery, so they were working the fields together. So when they came out of slavery and they were emancipated, there was a family unit where the mom and daddy worked. The mom and daddy's gonna, they're gonna raise the child together. They're gonna take care of the family together, and they're gonna educate. I mean, after supper, the Bible is open. So in the Long household, they're gonna have Bible study every night after they eat. Because James, even though James becomes a professor, he's also a minister as well. So the church and education from day one in the Long family is paramount to their family.
That went on all the way until my childhood.
Wow.
You were in church 3 times on Sunday. All during the week. Absolutely. I have 4 sisters.
Yeah, because your great-great-grandfather was a reverend also, right?
Yeah, he was. His sons were, and his sons were. Everyone else was like, my dad is named after him. My dad is Thomas Warren Long as well.
Wow.
He's deceased now, but he was the only one that did not go into ministry. All of his brothers did.
If you go to Palatka, to the Evergreen Cemetery, it's every Long that's buried there is either reverend or doctor.
Yeah.
Nice.
Where, when you found the grave site, where is it located? Is it in Jacksonville?
No, it's in Palatka.
Palatka, okay.
Because he ultimately moved to Green Cove Spring. He actually died in Florida, owned a house in Jacksonville rather, but the family estate ended up being in Green Cove Springs, Palatka. They're right next to each other. So that's where the family burial plot was. So, her dad's there, her grandfather's there, Charles Sumner Long is there, Reverend James Long is there, all her grandparents, everybody. Like, it's a big family plot.
Have y'all ever traced it back from your family roots from Cuba?
We have some movement, but there it's really a gray area because they were fishermen. Mm-hmm. So at some point, we're thinking that they may have been free at that moment. They got free from Cuba because that's where the trail ends for his father, James. Mm-hmm. We really haven't found out what happened to him, but then maybe was recaptured when he came to Florida and ended up on the Roberts plantation.
Let me ask you guys a question. We're going to do a roundtable discussion starting with me. And I guess we'll go to T. Smalls, up to Jared, and back down to you, Miss Long. Okay. As I become older, we already knew about African-American records is kind of lost. We don't really know who we are. And, lately, since Jerry been doing his history, all our records kind of chop off, and that's it. We don't have no history, back to a certain extent. And that's amazing that happened. We already knew it happened, but I guess when you get older, you really think about it, and you really think about your last name like you're Long, but that's not really your name technically. And we're like a lost generation that we don't really know who we are. So T. Smalls, how you feel about that?
Well, this is how I feel, man. We got to dig deeper. I think, man, as time from that point in time till now, man, they made it harder for us to actually look up our history. It's a lot of people, man, that was significant, man, in the way we live right now, man, that actually had a part in our liberation. You know what I'm saying? It's every time that I come on this podcast and Jerry presents something, man, it never amazes me, because when I think I know everything, it's something he always hit me with. I'd be like, oh man, I never heard about, T.W. Long, man. Let me go and see what's going on. But this is what we have to do, man. We have to look at our ancestry, man, and trace it back as far as we can go. Some people don't care, some people do. But it's always good to know where you came from, where you originated from. You never know who your ancestors is in your family line, your bloodline. You never know who that may be.
Right. Go ahead, Jerry.
I don't want to get sidetracked or stop talking about Thomas Warren Long, but what has happened in the Black community has actually happened in the white community over the last 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And with this white identity politics, and to understand, people of Irish descent are not related to the Anglos or the Saxons in any way, fashion. Anyway, okay. So have you heard that woman from Georgia starting that new political caucus, right? And they want to go back to Anglo-Saxon values. Well, in European history has been actually stripped by white America, because there was no such thing as white America before 1640. Right? It doesn't exist. The term white does not exist. You're Irish, you're Italian, you're Greek, you're a Spaniard, you're French, you're Austrian, you're Turkish, whatever. So white identity politics has stripped people of their European ethnic culture, right? And we're blending all these people into something they're not, to preserve one section of European history's way of life at the expense of all the others.
Right.
When you really think about that. So why would someone that's Catholic want anything to do with white Anglo-Saxon? Because the Ku Klux Klan used to attack the Southern European, the Jews, and the Catholics the same way they attack Black people. Right? Mm-hmm. They were burning crosses of Jew. They're still going on today, anti-Judaism. The largest mass lynching in American history was in Crescent, Louisiana, where they lynched, I think they tried to lynch 21, and I think they successfully lynched 20 Sicilians. And the response of the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, was he thought it was rather a good thing. And he said the only thing lower than the N-word was a Dago Wop.
Wow.
So, when these people want to identify and attach themselves to white Anglo-Saxon or pure Aryanism, if you only understood what your ancestors went through,
right,
by this same group of people, why would you want to assimilate to become part of what your oppressor was?
Right.
And when you really think about it, and I think that's why we need to. Killer Mike had a real interesting thing the other day. He said people need to get together with people that don't look like you, that don't come from the same place as you come, and have a conversation. I can't trace my family back on my grandfather's side. I'm actually on two portions of my grandparents' side, right? So my grandfather came over here at 16 years old by himself on a boat because a convent took my grandfather in because he was an orphan, because my entire family was killed by the fascists in Sicily, right? So they came over at 16. So there's no records of, they didn't, just like Hitler didn't give death certificates during the Holocaust, in the early 1900s when fascism was taking over Italy. One of the jokes has always been that Italy is shaped like a boot and Sicily is shaped like a ball, because they were always trying to kick the Sicilians back to Africa. That's always been the joke.
Right.
And so I can't trace my family history back. And then on, my stepdad's side, the same thing. His mother and his father and sister were killed by the Nazis in the street in Latvia. And then he and his mother had to go to a concentration camp. And once you get there, you weren't allowed to keep your wallet. So they couldn't prove they weren't Jews. So he actually had to live in a concentration camp. His mother died in that concentration camp of exhaustion. It was ultimately liberated, but I mean, he lived in a concentration camp, so like all that family history before that is gone, because once the Germans took it over and then the Russians took it over from Germany, they didn't keep people's records. All those buildings were burned to the ground. For me, finding someone else's family history kind of fulfills that loss that I can't fulfill.
Right.
On my side, so it brings me joy that I can give that to somebody else.
Right, good. Ms. Long, would you like to add on, or should we proceed?
I would just say, I suggest that anyone that if you just do one search, you'll be surprised. I mean, most people think that they won't find anything, you know, they go into it not knowing what to do, but you'll be surprised if you go on Ancestry, what you will find about if you're interested in finding out, you know, who and where you come from. It's a difference. It's an undescribable feeling to know, okay, this was my grandfather's name. But to put his name to his face to a picture, and you know, it gives like life to that person. He really existed. This is who he is. This is my family. You know, this is where I came from. It gives you a sense of pride like none other. Like I never thought that I would. It's becoming borderline obsessive now. I think that Jerry is going to have enough of me calling like, hey, did you know X, Y, and Z? But, you know, if I could find a way to monetize this, I probably would want to do this for the rest of my life.
Right.
I would just suggest anybody to just, you know, go on Ancestry, take the test, but go on and do some searches for yourself. It amazes me to be able to look at some of the documents from his military records. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
See the compensation, like really, it's just amazing. So I think we need to know. You can't know who you are until you figure out your past. It just, if it's possible.
Yeah, you ready for me to put the military record up?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, do what you do.
Okay, so after the conclusion of the Civil War, Thomas musters out of the 33rd at this point, because they changed the name from the 1st South Carolina Volunteers to the 33rd Regiment of the United States Colored Infantry. By this time, within a 2-year period, Thomas Warren Long is actually a sergeant of his unit. So when he musters out, he's a leader in the community. So a lot of the early settlers in La Villa are former military. So when La Villa is first forming here in Jacksonville, you know, Thomas is one of the first politicians. Him and his wife are the first settlers, along with the Spearing family, the Tillman Valentine and his family, and James Johnson, father, and Louise Johnson. Louise DeLitt Johnson. You know, these are the first settlers in La Villa. You had the Mitchell family, which is the Chappelle family, which is actually Dave Chappelle's kinfolk. We could have a whole show on the Chappelle family,
Right?
From Jacksonville. So, you know, they're the leaders of the community. So, you know, that's where Thomas Warren Long gets his start. So now he's an ordained elder in the AME Church. He's one of the founders of St. Paul AME Church. Being an elder, they started Mother Midway. Grant Chapel AME Church. So he's one of the most prominent ministers. So, you know, he's called upon to build churches throughout the whole state. So he goes on foot and horseback from here to Key West. I know that he established a church in Key West. I know that he established it in Madison County. Altamont Springs, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Brookville, here in Jacksonville, Green Cove Springs. So, you know, and with him, when he establishes all these churches, you know, he's out raising funds to oversee these churches being built. You know, and one of the newspaper articles, you know, he says, you know, he talks about how he got his first parsonage, you know, built with the church, where, you know, so he, you know, he was so proud of he had his own parsonage while he was in Madison County. And then while he's in Madison County, you're talking about a guy that could barely read 3 years earlier, right?
Wow.
And now he is the superintendent of public schools for Madison County. Okay.
Amazing.
Right. So then he's elected to the Florida legislature. He gets a name for himself. Actually becomes one of the most popular politicians in Florida. Him and by the name of what's his name? I'm trying to think. It'll come to me in a minute. so they become rivals. So they actually start running against each other. One of the guys from his same Masonic lodge, and the first Masonic lodge that he is the founder of. Guess what the name of the lodge was?
Was that
Charles Sumner Lodge.
wow?
So Henry Wilkinson Chandler, that was his name. So they were actually really good friends. They took turns. Both of them were worshipful masters of this lodge. So they start running against each other for office. So, so Charles loses the election to the Florida legislature. So then he ends up running for the Florida Senate and wins. And while he's in office, these guys weren't puppets. So, in some states, when African Americans were elected to Congress, through the filibuster, we all know the history of even before it actually comes before Jim Crow, comes to the black codes. Mm-hmm. So to keep someone from talking silence, you would hold on and they would just read things. And so like people like Robert Smalls will never get an opportunity to address the body. So Thomas Warren Long is actually someone who's actually not only has a voice on the floor of the Florida Senate, he is actually introducing bills. So him and the first black man from Florida that becomes United States Congressman is Josiah T. Walls. So they working together on a national education platform. So Thomas Warren Long is setting up in 1872. He wants to start up a Department of Public Schools for the state of Florida. He wants to and have certified teachers and so forth. And the schools were going to, even if they were segregated, it was still going to affect white and black students. Like it wasn't going to be, so there would be schools for everybody to get an education. Him and Josiah Walls are going to turn the I-floor corridor into a canal, right? So could you imagine from Volusia County all the way to Tampa, a giant canal for ships to get through? Yeah. That Florida actually would have been probably the largest shipping community state in the country, right? It wouldn't have been either Chesapeake Bay or Massachusetts Bay. People would have came through Florida because they could get all the way to the West Coast by cutting through the peninsula of Florida. And the white politicians were so hateful that they abandoned that at the expense of the state and expense of enriching everybody in the state. Filibustered their way, so this never they never voted for it, so they never approved it. I mean, that's some hate for your ass, excuse the expression, when you would rather be a podunk farmer with a title than enriching the entire state of Florida by making it the shipping capital of the United States.
Wow. I like this picture right here, Jerry.
I do too. So that's one of those are some heroes right there, because Thomas Warren Long's one of my heroes, and his commanding officer, Colonel Higginson, was sitting there writing in his book. He was badass, and that entire unit was badass. So and to me, if you look at the pictures, you get the one guy. Doesn't he look like Wesley Snipes? Tell the truth.
Yeah.
But the guy on the extreme left, I believe, is Thomas Warren Long. So that's Sergeant Long. This is when he's released. So let me read you a quote. The first time that let me find it here. Okay. I got to find this quote he wrote.
That's okay.
I'll give me a minute and I'll find it.
That's okay.
So, but he, Thomas Warren Long's commanding officer, wrote everything down. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So, like, he wrote his prayers and so forth. And I'm trying to find this quote. I want to read it in vernacular because it's more important that I read it in vernacular than try to I'll come to me in a few. I'll keep on looking while we're talking. But his military life meant everything to him. So when he gets released, he is proud This guy is proud to have been a member of not only the United States Colored Infantry, but having served with Thomas Wentworth Higginson, right? And he's proud that the Union Army won the war. So when he gets his freedom, not his freedom, when he musters out, he was interviewed by Thomas Wentworth Higginson, and his commanding officer said, "What are the effects of how do you feel?" And his reply was this: "If we hadn't become soldiers, all might have gone back as it was before. Our freedom might have slipped through the two houses of Congress, and President Lincoln's 4 years may have passed by and done nothing for us. But now things can never go back, because we have showed our energy and our courage and our natural manhood. Another thing, suppose you had kept your freedom without enlisting in this army. Your children may have grown up and been free and well cultivated, but it would always been flung in their faces that your father did not fight for his freedom." And what could they have answered? And his reply: "Never again can you say this about the African race no more."
Wow.
I like that.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that.
You got it down pat, brother. Hey.
When I first read that, it brought are you guys familiar with Dr. Danford of the Urban League?
I've heard of him. I'm not.
So he's the president of the Jacksonville Urban League, and he has a building on Union and Broad, and he's also starting the Veterans Empowerment Center. So, he's a big history buff. We actually dedicated Thomas Warren Long to the Wall of Fame. Patricia was with me when I got to induct him into the Jacksonville Veterans Wall of Fame. And when I found this, I couldn't wait, because he's a Vietnam veteran. I couldn't wait to go to Dr. Danford's office. It's like 6:00 at night, in the winter, when I first found this quote. And when I read that quote, the two of us were like in tears of when I told him this man's story and I read that quote. Dr. Danford was literally in tears the first time I read him that quote.
Wow. Man. What gives you the drive, man? In closing, what gives you the drive to keep doing this?
Connecting with people like Patricia or Camilla Thompson. I remember when I wrote the article and I finished writing the article and I sent it to her, and her reply was she was in tears.
Oh, man.
You know what I'm saying? There's nothing that is more fulfilling than to touch the soul of somebody's descendants and making them feel whole. Like you could tell the whole story. We could talk about Thomas Warren Long for hours and hours and hours, but his extraordinary life. Right. But to encapsulate it, the short thing is that I was able to give their family their history. And there's nothing that makes me feel better than when I write these articles and I spend all this time doing research and going to graves and tombstones all around the state and blowing off dust in county records, looking up when they served in office and so forth. It takes me months to sometimes it'll take a whole weekend to write one paragraph. My time. So when I put an article together, it takes sometimes 4 to 5 years to get all the information to write. Like Thomas Warren Long, I started him, I think around 2015 when I first got introduced to him.
Whoa.
So I finally had enough information over the last year where I was able to publish, when I authored my latest book, to make sure that there's a chapter dedicated to him. But that's how long it takes to do that. Did
you find any slave records? I know you have military records. Did you?
Yes, we found the inventory sheet of the Roberts plantation. It was a sugarcane. One of the things everybody thinks of slavery, they think of cotton, and yes, cotton was the engine. But if you lived in Virginia and Maryland, you most likely were on a tobacco plantation. Here in Florida, there were a lot of sugarcane plantations.
All the way down to the Caribbean.
There wasn't a lot of cover. So when you work in these sugarcane plantations, that sun would just tear your skin up. You know how humid it is here. Imagine, working a sugarcane plantation. Then you got to churn it on that big machine that they grinded it, right? They didn't have humans. They had they didn't have always, some people couldn't afford horses. So who did they use? Humans, slaves, to grind the sugar cane, to build all these buildings like the original State House was built by slaves.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They were carpenters. So it was brutal life living on a sugarcane plantation. And sugarcane, when you gather it, is not as light as cotton. So it was a brutal life that they had to endure on that plantation. So, the story of Thomas Warren Long is that when he went for that sugarcane plantation, that imagine him with that hat at the front house of the State House, and I'm a state senator, and I'm introducing bills, how that felt.
How you like me now?
Exactly.
Right.
But there was nothing hateful about that man.
Right.
He had, white allies all along the way too. He had befriended a lot of the
started
at
from
that
the
time,
bottom.
the Republicans, the radical Republicans were the progressives. They were the progressive party. So he worked with a lot of these people that they were working together to make this state, make this country a better place. The Southerners looked at them as carpetbaggers and and all that sort of thing. But a lot of people came from the North to try to change the laws. And Florida fought the black codes probably longer than almost any other Southern state. You don't see the complete fall of all the black politicians till I think 1920. So there was actually still some black politicians up till around 1920. Thomas Warren Long, he's in office, and I think as late as 1886, he's still holding a public office. So that's 11 years after the Great Compromise of 1877. So certain factions of the state, African American men were still fighting for their rights in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, in the public school, public works department, public schools, through aldermen, city councilmen, municipal court judges. That's another story that got to be told. Everything didn't fall in 1877. It was the beginning of the end. But here in Florida, there was probably 1,000 African-American men held public office as of late 1920.
Wow, that's amazing, T. Smalls.
It sure is, man.
And these are the stories that need to get told.
Right. Ms. Long, what would you like to say in closing? I know we can't get off here unless you say something.
Well, I'm just honored that you all took the time in honoring my family and my great grandfather. And as always, I want to give Jerry his flowers. He is amazing, and I cannot tell you how much of a blessing that he has been to our family. And nobody tells a story like Jerry. He makes it flow. You know what I mean? So he connects all the dots for us. And so he found something out today, and we're just excited to continue to connect these dots and add to this story. So I'm sure maybe perhaps sometime in the near future we'll have some more to share with you.
Right. Hey, T. Smalls, I have a trivia question for you.
What you got, man?
If Jerry came up missing with the missing persons report, nobody can find him, where will be the first place you look and you can tell the police he probably over there? Take a guess. Trivia.
I'll tell you.
Hold on, don't answer, Jerry. Don't answer. Hold on. What you gonna say, Small?
Wow,
in your
that's a good
opinion,
one.
Just in your honest opinion, it could be anything.
I'll say Broad Street.
All right, I'll say the graveyard.
You're both wrong. I'm gonna tell you where you're gonna find me.
What's that?
The public library.
Yeah.
I was close. I said Broad Street. I was close.
Let me say this, right? Let me say this. It's not my credit cards. It's not my concealed weapons license, my driver's license. The most important card in my wallet that I carry is my public library card.
I still got mine. Anybody out there still got theirs? I got mine. Yours is blue. Yours blue. Mine yellow. So I know I had mine for a long time.
Yeah, you got that old ancient one, all the magnetic strip already came off.
Hey, it's still there. I still got it.
We want to thank everybody for watching. Miss Long, the great granddaughter of Senator Long. He was a runaway slave born in the 1830s, and this is his great granddaughter. And I think your great grandfather has ties in Cuba. That's what you said, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Well, actually, what was it? Jerry, was it Mozambique, Africa? What was it?
Yes,
Jerry?
Mozambique. Yes, Mozambique.
Mozambique.
Yeah, Mozambique.
Mozambique, Africa, where he was captured.
We appreciate you. I think we made a little history. I never actually interviewed me and T. Smalls. I don't think Jerry has either on here with us. The an actual great granddaughter of a slave descendant.
Right. With the last name.
With the last name, yeah.
With the last name. Yep.
Yeah. That's the most intriguing part. Jerry, you got anything you want to say on the end?
I'll tell you the secret. So today, I've been working for the last couple of months on the story of Blanche Armwood, right? She's the first African-American woman to get a law degree in Florida. Mm-hmm. She's a civil rights icon. Like, she's up there with Ida B. Wells and so forth, right? So, I've been really working on telling her story. So I'm writing the final chapter today, and I finally found her obituary. And I was like, I almost screamed when I read her obituary because in 1939, when she passed, guess who does her eulogy?
Who?
Her great-grandfather, Charles Sumner Long.
Wow.
Two different people, two different coasts of Florida. But Charles Sumner was such a prominent AME minister. He's probably the most prominent AME minister of the early 1900s. So he was the one that was called to eulogize her. And I was just like, I couldn't wait to call her, get on the phone. I'm like, guess what I just found?
You actually have PW's obituary as well.
Yep.
That's a blessing.
Wow.
We enjoy y'all, man. T. Smalls, show us some love. Say a little prayer for everybody.
Well, thank you, God. Thank you, God, for allowing us to have this conversation. I pray for the T.W. Long family. I pray that, everybody finds out who their ancestors are. This right here is a testimony that our ancestors, man, are not forgotten. They wrote things that people may have think that they couldn't find, but they wrote them for a reason, because they know that people like us will find them to tell their story. And this is their story. In Jesus' name we pray. God, I thank you. Amen.
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 I appreciate everybody on the cast. Jerry, as always, you got a home with Let's Talk Under the Tree.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We enjoy you. I know you was going to bring the funk when you came on here. We already know that.
Always.
I'm glad I got to have some fun with a story for a change instead of having, be melancholy.
Right. We had a good time. I'm Pastor Palmer. Miss Long, we appreciate you. It was an honor. You have the same last name as your great-great-grandfather, runaway slave to senator. And I'm still saying that because that's something that's unheard of. T. Smalls, you did what you did as always. Let me hear you say alive, who is you? Alive, who is you in person?
Who is you? There it is.
There it is.
Right.
Don't forget to wear your mask. Let's talk on 2021. Tomorrow night, we have JJ from Good Times Live on the air and in person for everybody. He's going to chop it up with us. And we love y'all. And guess what? I'm out of here. Peace.
Kingpin Music.
We talking under the tree. We talking under the tree. Let's talk under the tree. Let's talk under the tree. We talking under the tree. We talking under the tree. Let's talk under the tree. Let's talk under the tree. Welcome to the show, appreciate that you came. Mr. Palmer T. Smalls, ain't a damn thing changed. We talking under the tree, yeah, we got them hot topics from Carolina to Duval. That's how we rock it on prime time. Check out the podcast, it's online, hit us up. We got a platform, you gon' shine. It was all a dream, we here now. Let me hear you say it loud, we talking under the tree. We talking under the tree. We talking under the tree.